that one game forged a 4-decade connection between me and Ryne Sandberg. Every time we crossed paths, it was the subject of conversation. There wasn't anything new to say. We just kind of reminisced about it. And then Ryne was kind enough to invite me to be part of the unveiling of his statue at Wrigley Field, which appropriately was on the 40th anniversary on June 23rd, 2024. And it's so poignant to think about the fact that Ryne looked well that day, and he believed that his cancer was in remission, and only a few months later it came back, and it came back with a vengeance. Come to think of it, Chicago in the 80s and 90s, and the number 23 was very good to me as a broadcaster.
Bob Costas, a Hall of Famer in his own right. He was the Ford Frick winner back in 2018. He's an absolute legend when it comes to broadcasting many sports. I mean, he did Michael's last shot in a Bulls uniform in 1998. He had the Sandberg game. There were many great things that Bob Costas got to see even here in Chicago, and he's sort of become an ambassador for Ryne Sandberg in that Sandberg game because he had the play-by-play, and he joins us right now on the Yingling guest hotline. Bob, how are you feeling today?
Well, I feel very sad. It wasn't a shock. We knew it was coming. But still, to lose not just a baseball legend, and that's a lot to say that someone's a baseball legend, but such a good person as Ryne Sandberg was, and a friend to so many of us, and someone who fans can feel good about having said he was my favorite player growing up, or he was the signature player of that era of the Cubs. There's nothing that compromises that, nothing that you have to rationalize or put aside when you think about Ryne Sandberg. He was a near-perfect player. Was he the greatest player of his time? No. But he was an excellent player, an almost flawless player. He did everything well. Did he have the overwhelming statistics of a Hank Aaron or a Willie Mays or now a Shohei Ohtani or an Aaron Judge? No. But in every aspect of the game, he was so excellent, and putting those excellent seasons together year after year paved the path to the Hall of Fame.
And, Bob, can you talk about how that game itself kind of fueled what ended up being a friendship that lasted decades?
Yeah, it was just my good fortune to be there, and as you laid out before you brought me on, the NBC Game of the Week was an institution going back into the 1960s. Kurt Gowdy and Joe Garagiola and later Tony Kubek and the great Vin Scully, and I was just a young broadcaster happy to be part of it. And that game went to the entire country on June 23rd, 1984. Beautiful sunny day at Wrigley, classic setting. It mattered that it was the Cardinals. That added something to it. You had some vivid personalities. Whitey Herzog in the Cardinal dugout, Hall of Fame manager. Ozzie Smith made a couple of incredible plays, Hall of Fame shortstop. Willie McGee was the MVP the next year in 1985 after Sandberg won it in 84. He hit for the cycle that day and still wasn't the player of the game. So you had all the elements, and it became the game that marked Ryne Sandberg as an MVP candidate. He eventually won it, and it let the nation know. I mean, you made this point earlier, that this is when the whole nation kind of focused on a given game. And in this case, the Cubs were in the process of being transformed from perpetual losers into genuine contenders. And as you know, they came within one heartbreaking loss of going all the way to the World Series that year. So if ever there was a game that personified all of it, personified what the game of the week was, personified a Hall of Fame player's career, the signature game of a Hall of Fame player's career, and served notice that the Chicago Cubs were a different thing in the mid-'80s than they had been for many years prior to, one game on that Saturday afternoon brought it all together.
The great Bob Costas joining us. It's Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000. And, Bob, you've seen it all. I mentioned, you did NBA Finals games. You did Michael's last game in a Bulls uniform. You've done Olympics. You've done all the biggest baseball games. How many games that you've broadcast in a regular season do you remember so vividly like that game?
Well, that's the greatest regular season game I've ever been part of, and you mentioned earlier, and then I got off in another direction and didn't really answer it. That one game forged a 4-decade connection between me and Ryne Sandberg. Every time we crossed paths, it was the subject of conversation. There wasn't anything new to say. We just kind of reminisced about it. And then Ryne was kind enough to invite me to be part of the unveiling of his statue at Wrigley Field, which appropriately was on the 40th anniversary on June 23rd, 2024. And it's so poignant to think about the fact that Ryne looked well that day, and he believed that his cancer was in remission, and only a few months later it came back, and it came back with a vengeance. Come to think of it, Chicago in the 80s and 90s, and the number 23 was very good to me as a broadcaster. Mm-hmm. Michael Jordan in the 90s, number 23, and Ryne Sandberg prior to. And, Michael Jordan didn't start with the Bulls until the fall of 84. So the reigning number 23 in Chicago in the summer of 84 and before Michael Jordan arrived was definitely Ryne Sandberg, both of them Hall of Famers.
Bob, which home run surprised you more, the first one or the second one?
The second one, because is he going to victimize Bruce Sutter, the reigning best relief pitcher in the National League, former Cub, obviously? Is he going to victimize him twice? And it shows you how much the game has changed, because Whitey Herzog had Sutter in the game for, I think, like 3 innings. And he hit it to almost exactly the same spot. Yeah. It was almost as if the same fan could have caught the ball in the left field bleachers. I guess that was the one that was a shock. 2 outs, nobody on. Bob Dernier works a walk on a 3-2 pitch that was razor close. Could have been called a strike. Darryl Porter, the late Darryl Porter, was the Cardinal catcher, and he muffed the catch. Mm-hmm. The ball popped out of his glove. And Tony Kubek speculated, one of the great analysts sitting next to me in the booth, speculated that had Porter caught it cleanly, it might have been called strike 3. In any case, ball 4 on a 3-2 pitch. Dernier goes down to first base, and here's Ryne Sandberg again.
Bob, you summed up what he was as a player and how he was flawless, but he wasn't Willie Mays, and he wasn't the greatest of all time. Would you say the one thing that I always have told people who are younger, and that Ryne Sandberg to me was ahead of his time, where the second baseman was always the slappy hitter who would try and punch and Judy it and, would hit for an average and maybe 1 or 2 home runs. He was, and I know he came up as a third baseman or shortstop, but he really became what a lot of big leaguers are today, where you could be a second baseman and you could be a power hitter and add the speed and the Gold Glove to go along with it.
Yeah, there were a few people prior to that era who played middle infield positions and were not the prototypical scrappy little middle infielder, slap hitter, steal bases. But it became more commonplace for someone of Ryne's size, or Cal Ripken Jr. playing shortstop for most of his career with the Baltimore Orioles, to be a bigger player and to hit for power. And to your point, Ryne Sandberg was not a spectacular player. He was an elegant player and a nearly flawless player. Everything he did was smooth and fluid. He won Gold Gloves not so much for making spectacular plays, although he made a few, but for making every play. He had long stretches of games without an error. He once had some 500 chances in a row without booting one. He was just, if you were a young baseball coach and said, here's one player you should look at, Ryne Sandberg would be a guy you should look at. He played the game as it should be played, and just as important, the way he carried himself was classy. And the word respect, which he emphasized in his Hall of Fame speech in 2005, was a big part of who he was. He respected the game. He played it hard, but he played it with respect. There were no histrionics attached to him. And as you may recall, on the occasion of the unveiling of his statue at Wrigley, Craig Counsell led all the Cub players in uniform out onto the balcony overlooking Gallagher. That was respect, unspoken, not a word spoken. Big crowd gathered on the lawn out there, and then behind where I was speaking, I didn't see them at first, and people in the audience pointed my attention, and I turned around and saw all those players up on that balcony. That shows the generational connections that are not unique to baseball, but they're a greater part of baseball than other sports because of its rich history and its reliance on nostalgia and history, the generational connections, and also the word respect. And respect was the most important word in Ryne Sandberg's vocabulary, and it was reciprocated because he showed respect to others and showed respect for the game. It multiplied the respect that others had for him.
Such a great point. The great Bob Costas joining us, Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000. We're counting down the 25 greatest clips of all time, and we put your call of the two Sandberg home runs in there because, as you know, it's not just the great play. It's got to be accentuated with the great call. When you hear your call of that, do you like the way you described that, and does it feel like 41 years ago, or does it feel like just yesterday?
It doesn't feel like yesterday, but it sure doesn't feel like 41 years ago. It feels like something in between. And I think, I've heard it so many times. It's accurate, and it has surprise in it, especially on the second one. It has a feeling of surprise, which was authentic, and I think it summed up how a lot of people watching that broadcast finally felt. Like, can you believe this? Mm-hmm. It happened again? Oh, my gosh.
Bob, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you kind of a bigger baseball question here, and I'm sure that Rhino would respect because, the game seems to be in a really good place. Good decisions being made by Major League Baseball. People are watching. Do you feel like the game's in a really good spot despite the fact that there may be a labor issue down the road here, not too far away?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of good trends, good indicators, but there are a substantial number of owners who feel that their teams cannot compete or that in order to compete they have to break a sensible business model. And you're probably aware of the confrontation that took place in the Phillies clubhouse with Bryce Harper telling the commissioner to get the F out. And I don't care what the disagreements may be, that's a bad look for Bryce Harper. What the heck is that? He's the commissioner of baseball. He comes in there to discuss the issues. Even if there are disagreements, let's have civil disagreements. If your attitude is, get the F out of here, meaning we can't even discuss what you might want to put forward, that almost indicates if more players and their representatives feel like Bryce Harper, we're not going to get anywhere. But again, there's a push for some form of a salary cap. And alone among the four major sports, baseball's Players Association has always felt that is a line we will not cross. This is absolutely a matter of principle. We will never have a salary cap or any version of a salary cap. But players in the NBA and the NFL seem to do pretty well in a salary cap situation. The NHL, without it, wouldn't be able really to thrive because their business model is different. At least some adjustments have to be discussed, and one of those adjustments would have to be a salary floor, so that some of these teams that underspend would have to increase their payrolls. And if it's structured properly, that might appeal to the overall membership of the Players Association. But we'll see. It's complicated, but if there's such a hardline stance that we can't discuss anything, then we are going to see a lockout in December of 2026.
Yeah, and hopefully we won't. Bob, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your stories with the fans. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Take care.